what is really going on with this Obamacare, which is already a disaster and it hasn't even fully been implemented. You're going to pay through the nose. The quality of your care is going to be reduced. The waiting times are going to be extended. Why the hell would we trade in the greatest healthcare system on the face of the earth for this Soviet-style, top-down, iron-fisted system? Well, in truth, you didn't trade it in for this. Oh, yes, I know people voted for Obama. But I want to give you a little bit more information. You've heard some of this maybe rather superficially, but I've done some digging over the weekend. As you know, Congress passed the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, March 22nd, 2010. All Democrats, not a single Republican. 2,700 pages long. No statute, none, should be 2,700 pages long. No statute should be 2,700 pages long. The law establishes about 180 new bureaucracies and agencies and commissions and boards and programs. They have the power to tell doctors and hospitals what is quality care, what's not, best practices, the availability of medicines, and on and on and on. And the Congressional Research Service reported the precise number of new entities that will ultimately be created is currently unknown. The regulatory burden is going to be enormous. The taxes, 21 different taxes. The burden is going to be enormous. And during the early stages of the law's implementation, the executive branch already issued last year 13,000 pages of Obamacare regulations. In the initial Internal Revenue Service regulations, they amounted to 159 pages. Now, this is what I want you to listen to, because this is the problem. When Congress passed Obamacare, it attempted by statute to confer fundamental legislative powers on the executive branch. And it even sought to prohibit future Congresses from altering its unconstitutional acts. So you have a supermajority of Democrats and Obama who are trying to change the Constitution, empowering the executive branch to legislate through Obamacare, and to try and immunize what they've created from future Congresses. This was, in some ways, a constitutional coup. Now, specifically, Congress created this 15-member Independent Payment Advisory Board, which ostensibly is responsible for controlling Medicare costs. This board submits a proposal to Congress, which automatically becomes law. And the Department of Health and Human Services must automatically implement unless and only unless the proposal is blocked by Congress and the President. And even then, it can only be blocked if the Congress and President come up with and agree to a substitute. So Congress creates this entity, Obama signs on to it, and this entity has equal or more power than our two elected branches of government. Did you know that? Obamacare also prohibits you, the citizen, from challenging the board's decision in court. These decisions affect you and your lives. You can't even, under this law, take it to court. Also, as I said, Obamacare seeks to tie the hands of future Congresses. In other words, that Congress that passed this is dead and gone. So they seek to control this Congress and every future Congress by forbidding Congresses from repealing the board itself outside of a 7-month period in the year 2017. There's a small window. And only then, they claim, can that Congress repeal the board altogether. And it has to repeal it by a supermajority of 3/5 vote of both houses. And if Congress doesn't act in that time frame in the year 2017, Obamacare says Congress is prohibited from ever altering the board and its proposal power. Period. Are you not stunned? Apart from all the rest, the abuse of power by that Congress, that supermajority Democrat Congress and Obama, temporary politicians all, in attempting to reorganize the federal government and fundamentally redraft the Constitution outside of either amendment process, with the intention of binding future Congresses and leaving citizens with no political or legal recourse, is simply sinister. It's tyranny. And that's what that law did, and there's nary a word about it. But I'm not done. To show you how sinister that supermajority Democrat Congress was and this president is and was. You know what happened a few months after they did that? They did it again. Under something called DoddFrank. July 21, 2010. 4 months after Obamacare. The same Congress passed and the president signed the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, known as Dodd-Frank, supposedly intended to protect the consumer from risky decisions by financial institutions. Mark, we need more regulations. Oh, really? This law is every bit as offensive to our Constitution as Obamacare, because it also violates the separation of powers doctrine, and it insulates broad policy-making decisions from we the people. Let me explain. Under Dodd-Frank, Congress established the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. All these bureaus like the old Soviet Union or Red China, communists like bureaus, don't you know? Now, this bureau has open-ended power to prevent certain financial institutions from committing or engaging in, quote, unfair, deceptive, or abusive practices respecting a consumer financial product or service. What does that mean, unfair, deceptive, or abusive practices? The statute doesn't define them. This board has exclusive authority to prescribe rules, issue guidance, conduct examinations, require reports, or issue exemptions with little recourse by those affected by its decisions. That Congress in 2010 denied future Congresses any appropriations authority over this board because this board is authorized under this Dodd-Frank law to fund itself by unilaterally claiming funds out of the Federal Reserve Board's budget. And the director of this board determines unilaterally the amount of funding the board receives from the Federal Reserve. And the law also explicitly prohibits the House and Senate Appropriation Committees from even attempting to review the budget. And the director of this board receives a 5-year term, and he can only be removed by the President of the United States, quote, for inefficiency, neglect of duty, or malfeasance in office, unquote. So the idea of a unitary executive where the President is in charge of his employees? No. He has to actually have cause to fire this guy. He's not at will. I'm not done. Under this Dodd-Frank bill, Congress established a 15-member Financial Stability Oversight Council. I tell you, this is all like commie stuff. You just hear, anyway. And it granted that council broad executive powers. It has open-ended discretion to designate non-bank financial institutions systematically important. Systemically important. Sorry, I don't have my glasses. Systemically important. Why is that important? Because once they unilaterally designate a non-bank financial institution as systemically important, from that flows wide-ranging regulatory authority over these businesses. The law actually prohibits aggrieved parties from challenging the legal sufficiency of these actions and conclusions in court. Two colossal power grabs set up by the last Democrat Congress and Obama, empowering the massive administrative state, the bureaucracy, attempting to grant to the bureaucracy in the executive branch constitutional authority that the Constitution rests with the legislative branch. And it rests with the legislative branch, ladies and gentlemen, because you and I elect the legislative branch. The power of the purse, which belongs to the legislative branch, now belongs to these entities. Now, you see, it would seem counterintuitive, wouldn't it, for Congress to surrender its own power to these entities that it creates, which are housed within the executive branch? But if the purpose is to centralize and concentrate power in the federal government, in defiance of the Constitution, in defiance of republicanism and federalism, which if you've read Meritopia, you know that's the purpose, then you know that this makes perfect sense. The problem is it's destroying our country. Now you know the core of the problem with Obamacare and DoddFrank, and they passed those two within 4 months of each other. And can you imagine what they'll do if they take the House of Representatives back in 2014? The damage they've already created is just beyond imagination.
Mark Levin.